Hi, this is Pro-Exam with this episode of Living and Working Abroad. What can expats do with Brexit? Well, we could go passively amid all the noise and haste around us. The 1927 poem Des Eto'Ra talks about the things that we desire. And we've got a lot of noise, a lot of confusion with with Brexit and how that's going to impact expats as if it's the end of the world. What we do know is that there are expats that live and work within the EU, and there's expats that live and work all around the world, in the Middle East, in USA, in India, Hong Kong, and China. You don't need to be in the EU to be an expat and to be living and working abroad, to protect your property rights, to protect your family in the event of ill health or death, to protect your business and secure your overseas trading. Everyone who imports into the EU from outside, if you buy something online from America or China into the EU, then you'll have it custom checked and you'll have to pay a duty if it's over a certain value. It's standard practice. It's standard practice because that's just the way the world works. And the change that's going to happen for business is just that the EU is a free trade zone within the EU, but it's got big tariff barriers that applies to anybody coming from outside into the rest of the world. Now, the World Trade Organization has its own set of tariffs. The EU sets slightly uniform. It's not that the EU is lower. The EU is not lower. The EU is often higher in its import tariffs than under World Trade rules. And the EU applies a sales tax on business and trade within the EU, which is not necessarily always the case outside the EU. The VAT is an EU tax. So it's free to trade within the EU as long as you're applying VAT. There's no cross-border trade tariffs, but there is coming outside the EU, and that's because the consumers, whether they're a business-to-business sale or a retail sale, the consumers don't see the import tariff being applied on goods they buy within the EU. They're paying a price that already includes that import tariff on that. And so, there are global rules that apply for countries and for expats and for business around the world. And the EU is just a different version of that. So for EU expats with Brexit, there are lots of opportunities for things to change. When the poem was Desiderata was written in 1927, Europe was still getting over the First World War. After the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 carved up Europe, and the old empires of Austria, Turkey, and Germany were carved up to create new countries like Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. All these countries were only created after the First World War. The Turkish Ottoman Empire was broken up. This is the empire which the Crusaders fought 1,000 years ago, and it was ripped apart after the First World War. The Germanic people were spread out over lots of different countries, enclaves in Czechoslovakia, Poland, Austria, as well as Germany, which cause more problems later on. Not for this subject. So the world, the Europe, was struggling to come to terms with the outcome of the First World War. And, it led into a 1930s depression, where in New York, there was a shanty town built up full of people that are dispossessed through the depression without work. So the whole area, which is now Central Park, was a shanty town filled with desperate people without income, without works, without a quality of life. Today, in Europe, we have refugee camps, we have people fleeing destitution and bombing and conflict in Africa, in Syria, in Afghanistan. Over 500 people, civilians, dying a month in Afghanistan through the ongoing troubles. Aleppo had 230,000 people killed in an earthquake in the 1130s, and yet still today it's been bombed out of existence by a conflict initiated by ISIS and carried on by the Syrian government, the Russians and the Iranians to release and free those people from that occupied town. So the Europeans, they haven't got it that tough. So UK expats living and working in the EU might need to act as global expats and have slightly different arrangements. EU expats going to work in the UK might have to act like global expats and follow more of the rules and restrictions they'd have to do in Canada or Australia or USA, going to a country outside the EU. The EU might make arrangements with the UK afterwards, but the hurdles and the methodology is the same. So if an expat can go and live and work in the Middle East or in India or in China or in the USA, then they can go and live and work in any EU country, including the UK. Under EU citizens' rights, there is something to lose because that does give a freedom of movement within the EU. But that is all. Expats, their family and their business can still set up business in a foreign country, live and work and pay taxes in that country according to those local rules. And they may be different from the harmonised rules under the EU, but they're still going to be allowed. The conflict that we've got today is nothing compared to the era of the First World War and the depression of the 30s. It's nothing compared to some of the conflicts that are going on in the world today. And when you listen to the PR, lobbyists, social media, ranting and raving, think about what you desire. Think about what you want for your expat life, living and working abroad, and consider how you can strive to be cheerful and be happy and enjoy an expat life, living and working abroad. For any help on the transition with Brexit, contact ProAct for some ProAct know-how at proactpartnership.com and follow us on our living and working abroad pages.